Hey everybody, welcome to Forest County, Pennsylvania and the Forest County Outback channel, where we combine history with the outdoors. Now today we are going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, choo-choo trains. So in this series we frequently talked about the logging railroads and briefly mentioned the specialized geared locomotives that operated on those roads. Today we're going to go look at a unique survivor from that era, and we're going to meet a representative of the group that is working to restore that locomotive to operating condition. This is Forest County Outback 45. These Corry RAILS and the Saga of Climax A313, and it is quite a tale. The biggest problem facing lumbermen in the early 1800s was getting enough logs to the mills, and the methods used were floating them if you had a stream big enough, or skidding them by horse or oxen. And this was a slow process, it was expensive, and they needed a better solution. So they experimented with horse trams, and that helped, but it really didn't solve the problem. It eventually became obvious that a steam-powered logging locomotive was the answer. Now, the geared locomotive was developed to operate in the unique conditions of a logging railroad, and they began to appear on the market in the early 1880s. And there were several manufacturers, but the three that absolutely dominated the market were Shays, Climax, and Heisler's. And if you could go back 120 years in time in Forest County, it was, these were the three locomotives that you were certain to see operating in these woods. Now, the Climaxes were manufactured in Corry, Pennsylvania, and today there are two surviving locomotives located in Corry. There's a Class A, which was like the first generation. It's a fairly small locomotive, and then a larger second generation Class B. And I went up there a couple weeks ago thinking, hey, this is great because I can film both of these locomotives and show the evolution that they went through. So a couple weeks ago I headed up to Corry, and I was pretty pumped up about this. I was pretty excited about the whole project. And the first place I stopped was the Corry Area Historical Society Museum, and that houses the Class B. I got there and they would not let me film. In fact, they didn't even want me to take still photographs. They were very polite about it. They gave their reasoning. I don't agree with those reasons. In my opinion, the purpose of a museum is to educate and inform, and if you're not doing that, then what you have is a warehouse with a fancy name. So that was pretty disappointing. Well, that disappointment was more than compensated for when I went a few blocks down the street and talked to the guys at Corry RAIL. And that's an organization that is in the process of restoring to operational condition the only complete Climax A known to be in existence. So we're gonna head over there and we're gonna let Carl pick up the story there. Hey everybody, today we're at Corry RAILS, and this is Carl Wassink, and he's the vice chairman of Corry RAILS, where they are in the middle of a locomotive restoration. And I'm going to let Carl explain what Corry RAILS is and what they're up to here.
Corry RAILS is an acronym for Corry Rail and Industrial Legacy Society. And our initial goal was to see what we could find in very obviously old railroad and industrial items that were manufactured here or used here in this area, things that most people don't see, bring them home and restore them if we can to display and tell the story. Our first project, we decided to look for another Climax. There is a Climax at the Corry Museum, one of 21 Climaxes known to exist, and we decided, let's see if we could find another one. So in the process, we really didn't know if we were going to be able to find one or not. The chances were that we weren't going to be able to. And in doing research, I knew that there was one that was torn apart in Alaska. And it is the only complete Climax A, which it's an all wooden cab and frame. Later A's had steel frames. Very, I don't know what the right word is, not antique, but antique. Very rudimentary in construction so that anybody can kind of work on it in the field. It's got a very simple 2-cylinder vertical engine, basically what they call a marine style engine. What we have here, this is the original engine from Climax A313, which went to Council, Alaska as part of the Wild Goose Railroad in 1902. It's a vertical 2-cylinder marine style engine, and on the other side there is a logo, Climax Manufacturing, Corry, PA on it. One of only a couple of places on the whole engine where there is actually anything that says Climax or Corry.
Okay.
As you see it here, and it is in fully operable condition. We have not had it under steam. It has been under air pressure. So when we do it under air, in this engine, unlike an automobile engine, a modern day automobile engine, it does not have a pressurized oiling system. Everything's drip. You can see drip cups. There's drip cups down below. The oil into the cylinders has to be injected into the air, and you're talking about hot steam, and so it's the hot steam that carries the lubrication down into the cylinders for the rings. So if you're just running on air, and air is basically dry, and you don't have an injection, and dry air does not carry the oil well, we can run it maybe 5 minutes, and then we have to tear some of the stuff apart and put oil in to make sure that we don't ruin what we've already got. So anyway, that's the engine. It is a 2-speed engine. About the only Climax, the only engine in the United States that was manufactured as a 2-speed. Slow and slower, not high speed, low speed. Maximum mile per hour on this particular engine is probably 13 miles an hour. In low gear, maybe 7. Pulling power is tremendous.
And that's what these were built for. Speed was not important, it was the pulling.
Correct. These were, the majority of these engines, these Climax A's, ended up in the logging industry. Mining industry was probably next. There were a few used in remote locations for transportation, hauling passenger cars and freight. This one was used in gold mining during the gold rush, the known gold rush of 1900. The Wild Goose Railroad had 4 of these Climaxes up there, Climax A's, and they hauled the guys back into work, hauled equipment back in. The gold that came back out was in totes, bags, so it wasn't like hauling ore out. It was hauling equipment in, passengers coming back out in their golden totes. And this particular engine being out in Council, which is 85 miles northeast of Nome, at the time the northernmost railroad in the world. It climbed over a mountain, Mount Mordaunt, through a saddle, down the other side to Ophir Creek. Only 8 miles of track, and it was mainly used over a 6-year period for hauling dredge parts in. Wild Goose had 4 claims side by side at the head of Ophir Creek, and they decided that it was so rich that the only way to get a good payoff out of it was to do it as quickly as possible, and that was going to be by using a dredge. The dredge had to come in piece by piece, and starting in 1902 to 1906, all the parts were hauled in that 4-year time period, and assembly was happening as they were going, but it was not completely assembled until 1908. That's when the dredge came into operation, and operated until in about 1923. What you see here next to me, within geared locomotives, the logging industry, you have the 3 major competitors were Shea, Climax, and Heisler. Shea was built in Lima, Ohio, Climax here in Corry, and Heisler was in Erie. Each of them were geared. How they put the power to the wheels was different in each one, which put different capabilities for each one of them. Climax approached it from a standpoint, and by the way, the gearing on these, this is the invention of Charles Darwin Scott from Spartansburg. He was a lumber guy, and they had converted their lumber operation, their mill operation, into steam instead of using water power. They needed to be able to work 24/7 around the year, all year long. And so they had a tramway going out into the woods, horse-drawn, on wooden trams, basically a flat car, to be able to bring the timbers in to the mill. Charlie decided to think about this, and well, the steam engine worked pretty well in the shop. I wonder if it'll work well if we could get that steam engine mounted on one of our flat cars and use that instead of having to feed horses all year long. So he started experimenting with it. This would, we're guessing it was somewhere around 1882, 83.
Okay, we have a series of photos documenting the adventures of 313 when it got to Alaska.
Okay, this is 313 during the first week after it arrived in Council, and they're laying their own track in front of them. Pine rounds, which were harvested off the top of the mountain near Council, floated downstream, and those are used as the ties, and then steel rails on top of that. Okay, this shot, Charlie Reeder, who was a jack of all trades in Nome, and actually this date is incorrect. That's actually 69, not 56. Charlie Reeder decided he wanted to salvage, restore Climax A313, which was out in Council, 85 miles out of Nome. So he drove his bulldozer out there, this was in the springtime, still snow on the ground and raining. Drove the bulldozer out there 85 miles, had a skid underneath it, loaded the engine onto a skid, and then towed it back into Nome. Had to have been like a 3-day drive and whatever. This is him coming back into Nome. There were actually bets in the local bars on Front Street as to what minute Charlie was going to come into town. So after this, it sat behind Charlie's shop. His plan was to restore it. That never happened. Sat there for 10 years. In 1979, Keith Christensen bought the locomotive, the little locomotive, from Charlie Reeder, and then barged it down to Bethel, which is partway down to the Aleutian Islands. At Bethel, they had a container loading operation. So here's a photo of it being loaded up on top of the containers on the container ship. From there, it went on down through the Aleutian Islands and all the way to Seattle, where everything was offloaded at Seattle, and then it was put back onto a Sealand barge and barged back up to Anchorage. At Anchorage, this is it arriving as it arrived in Seattle. And then following this, it was shipped, well, excuse me. At this point, Keith Christensen had this whole operation. The engine, the skid that it got drug in on, the first skid underneath, which is Foss Barge, which barged it down to Bethel, and then the pallet, a little bit bigger pallet for going on top of the containers. That arrived that way in Anchorage, but this is actually a photo of it in Seattle on its way back to Anchorage. From there, Keith loaded it onto a 2-axle utility trailer and with his pickup truck hauled it to his house 40 miles out of Anchorage up in Eagle River, placed it on some tracks beside his house, and the next spring began 34 years of disassembling and working on parts.
Okay, go ahead.
One of the aspects of this restoration is that with this having been built in 1902 and with the rudimentary construction, there are very few, if any, blueprints of any of it left in existence. In 1902, when they were building these, they did not put together a set of drawings for every locomotive. They had drawings for the engine, they had drawings for the bolsters, they had drawings for various things, and they would pick out which ones were going to go on a particular engine. And that would be the build list. And they would just turn those individual drawings and pieces over to the floor, and the shop floor would then create the locomotive. So not having any drawings to go by, and this being wood basically, which shrinks over 120 years, we had to create our own set of drawings. We have one of our volunteers from down in the Virginia area. He has been a self-taught CAD 3D guy, and he has gone through, we started out with the frame, and as you can see in the photo here, we have the bolsters off of one of the trucks, and he has created all of the technical drawings for us building this. He's also now working on the running gear and the boiler, and then the cab will be the last thing that he works on. So thanks to Bill Simonton and all of his expertise and his measuring and everything, we have a fairly good set of drawings to construct this with. And here we have a model of a Climax A. And there were various configurations of this. Ours had an extended cab up into here and windows that closed. So yes, very similar to this, but there's little bit differences between them. This is the same T-boiler that we have for ours. You can see the water tank on the back. In creating this, the gentleman who put it together used drive trucks off of a Bachmann Class B, small Class B, and then made parts of the T-boiler and the water tank and so on. Eventually we will make a closer version to ours. One of the items that is always looked for, and this is off of a B, so you can see the builder plate is on the side. On a B, they're on the side. On an A, there is only one builder plate, and it is placed up on the running plate. And this is the original builder plate off of this. 4 holes, 2 holes in each of the 4 corners. That was 4 of them were done by the manufacturer, by Climax, when they installed it. The other 4 were, for whatever reason, drilled so that it could be mounted on the wall and look a little more squared up. We didn't know that this existed at first. We did some research and finally found it, and 3 years later it was donated back to the locomotive. In the process of that, we have created, and this one is not finished, we have created replica plates in brass. They are considerably heavier than the original bronze ones, but it is taken directly off of the original. These are for sale on our website, corryrails.com, to help finance our restoration. We are selling these finished, and there will be an inscription on the back, a very nice inscription. We will be selling these at $1,000. And rest assured, those funds will go into the restoration of this little locomotive, one of the rarest. It's the only complete Class A left in existence anywhere in the world.
Okay.
What we have here is the original water tank off of Climax A313. Setting for 120 some years, the bottom had rusted out, and Keith had that section cut out, a false bottom put in so that he could retain the majority of the metal, and then restored so that it looks original. It is original, except it has a false bottom in it, supports underneath, and so on. This is a lid, a water tank lid from a smaller Climax A, probably off of a 15 ton, and this is a water tank for an 18 ton. So we are in the process of casting a new one. You can see it's got drip rim around it to hold it in place. Will go on top of the filler. These were filled by a steam-operated pump, basically a Venturi type action, and then the valve for opening and closing, and then from there the water would be pumped into the boiler. So by the time we are done, this will have been sandblasted down and repainted, the interior coated with some sort of a water resistant paint on the inside also.
Okay.
This is the T boiler, and you can see it forms a T, therefore a T boiler. This was one of the iterations of boilers that developed through the years with the Climax A. There was about 5 or 6 different boiler styles over the period of time. This is the original. It is a lap seam, double riveted lap seam. There was some destruction of the steel that went on over the time that it was setting out in Ophir and Council. So that welding repair was attempted to be made, but it has some issues and problems with warpage. A lot of that has been ground down. There are some small spots where you can see that welds were made and ground down. Those were not a problem. When they got into the big one, they ended up with some issues. So yes, we could repair this boiler. However, it would lose all of its originality. So we are going to retain this boiler as is, as a static display, so that people who want to take a look at this have the opportunity. To our knowledge, it is the only complete Climax A T boiler. The inside of it, you can see the front tube sheet. All the tubes were removed. We will be building a boiler to exactly this size. However, the rivets on the pressure end, at least, will be fake rivets. It will be a welded boiler, which over time that will be useful in our inspections, not having to tear everything apart. All of the attachments are going to go with it to the Boilermaker, who is up in Maine, and assembled up there. We want him to have everything, so there is no question that everything fits. Can't think of a whole lot of other issues with it. It mounts down below floor level in the engine. The top of the vertical portion, this is actually the steam dome from here up. Normally you would see a steam dome sitting here, a sand dome sitting here on most of your rod locomotives. This has a sand dome here for putting sand down on the track at the wheels, so they've got traction. And there is no steam dome up front. The top of this is the steam dome. So your steam comes off the highest spot, which is also the driest steam. From there, it goes directly into the top of the engine, and then exhausts out the cylinders on the other end, up into, actually it comes into the saddle underneath here, and then up through 2 orifices, which creates the draft going up the pipe to draw the heat through the tubes. As you can see, we've got a pile of wood here. This is the frame for Climax A313, built in 1902. It was never housed inside of a building. It was always outside, and where it was in Council and Ophir, you're dealing with minus 60 degrees and 80-mile-an-hour winds in the winter. So not being housed and exposed to the elements, you get a lot of things happening to the wood. So virtually all of the wood frame is being replaced. Okay, here we're going to discuss something for a couple of minutes, and then we'll look at what this attaches to. This is the front end of the engine, and these are the 2-speed gears. So you've got low and lower. These mechanisms here are the forward and reverse. When this gets shifted one way, these rods will go one direction. When it's over this way, they'll go the other direction. And this is your valving area in here. This is actually the valve up here, and this is what keeps the valve going straight up and down. So now down here, the 2-speed gear, you have another shifter mechanism over here that moves this back and forth. So this is the gears that are sliding. You have a neutral here, and forward here, excuse me, reverse here, and it's pretty simple, but you got to keep it filled up with grease. And we have oilers on these 2 bearings, and of course we have oilers in here. There's probably about 30 different places that need to be greased and oiled on this engine constantly. So now let's take a look where this sits. We have a mock-up frame. I apologize, but right now this is upside down. These wheels are going to sit on the ground, and what you see down here is actually the side sills of the frame, the 26-foot long frame pieces. And these are the original pieces that are the lowering blocks. And then the engine sits on the top of these cross members. And there's 6 bolts that hold that on in place. Now those gears that you saw that we were looking at attached to the engine, those mesh with these 2 gears up here. And with those 2 setting in between, that's neutral. And then you shift it one direction and you got your high speed, you shift it the other direction, you got your low speed. Your bearings, what look like 2 large bearings, those are actually Babbitt. And then your, what we refer to as the horns, the trunnion horns, they are like the U-joint, which is these right down in here. And this is actually what would be the equivalent of your needle bearings in a modern U-joint. And these go on like that. And we have new ones of these, and we will be needing to machine them to fit on the ends of the trunnions. So here.
All right, thanks Carl from Corry Rails for showing us their project here. And if you want to donate, help out in any way, Carl can tell you how.
Thanks, Terry. We appreciate having you guys here and taking the time to watch the video. We have, of course, we always need money. These projects don't come cheap, and we do a lot of grant writing, trying to get grants, but those aren't always successful. If you want to help financially, online on our website, which is corryrails.com, there's a store on there where we have hoodies and t-shirts and so on for sale. We also, as I said earlier, have our builder plate, which are very unique and original style builder plate, all brass, for $1,000. Our budget at this point has been, we had $80,000 to bring it back here, purchase it, and bring it back. And of course, got ongoing expenses and our boiler project, which our new boiler will end up running somewhere around $163,000. So we can always use the funds, and will always go to good use. You can also check out our videos and other information on Facebook at Corry Rails, 2 words, on Facebook. And other than that, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks. Okay. Okay, well, thanks to Carl for talking to us, and a thank you to all the men and women who are working hard at Corry Rails to bring 313 back to life. If you have a buck or two that's itching to do some good work, they could use the help. They also do work sessions, so if you're not afraid to get your hands dirty, you can help out that way. You can find them on the interwebs at corryrails.com and on Facebook at Corry Rails. You can also help Forest County Outback out by liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting. Check out our merch shelf down below, somewhere down there. And oh, and you can, I've been giving the wrong email address out for the channel. You can contact me at terry@forestcountyoutback.com. So they're right. And thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one. Geared locomotives. Cut. Frequently talked about vlogging. Cut. Forest County Outback number 45. Corry Rails and the Saga of Climax A1A. And it is quite a saga. And I said that wrong. Okay. Sorry. A1A is Florida Coast Road, and it's also the name of a Jimmy Buffett album. Very early album from in his career when he was actually making good music before he sold out. And I was listening to that last night, to that album, so that's where the slip came from. Cut. Forest County Outback number 45. Corry Rails and the Saga of Climax A1A. And it is quite a tale.